Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 9 of Let's Talk. We're joined again with Josh. Josh, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, yeah. Yourself?
Yes, not too bad, not too bad. We are, I think, coming towards the end of lockdown. Maybe when this is released, people will be a bit more free. But as you can tell, we are recording this online because Josh and I are not allowed to be in the same room as it stands. But we've got a very, very exciting topic today, Josh. Perhaps not one that people would expect, the topic of church discipline, which might seem like a little bit of a random one, but it's one that maybe we don't know much about or don't think much about. But it's something which is definitely talked about in the Bible with regards to the New Testament church. So Josh, as we think about church discipline, how would you define church discipline? Like, what is it? When we talk about church discipline, what do we mean?
Yeah, so church discipline is disciplining a church member. Really, it's exposing and correcting the sin in the church, and it's there to guide and lead the church in what is expected of them. Of course, that doesn't mean that we are perfect as Christians, but it's there to take action that sometimes we can deliberately harm the church, and it's there to prevent that from bringing dishonor to God. And a lot of people don't think, but it's actually part of the discipleship process. It's not on its own, it's actually part of it, and it's there to guide and lead, and it's for everyone's benefit, really, even the people who's been disciplining and even the church members that are witnessing it. So
it's helpful, yeah. We don't tend to think of church discipline as discipleship, but as you say, it's a really important part of church life and church discipleship. So you kind of comes up the idea there of it's the kind of the church kind of maybe pulling up one of its members who's maybe living in sin in an unrepentant way, to try and bring them, restore them, and for the health of the church and the witness of the church. That's really helpful. When many people hear about church discipline, and maybe even hearing what you said there about church discipline, they might kind of think to themselves, that sounds really harsh. What would you say to that? Are they right to make that accusation?
yeah, it does seem as if it is harsh at the time, but I think we need to remember that church for a lot of people can sometimes be, they think it's a hobby, it's a routine, it maybe be a habit. But it's so much more than that. We need to remember it's so much more than that. And the church is a body of believers set apart from the world to be God's people. The church isn't a Christian club, it's a commitment. And because membership isn't to be taken lightly, the church needs to enforce what is acceptable from their members. But members should know what is expected from them as they're joining the church. So they're not going in blind, they're not going in thinking that this is way over their heads. They know what they should be. They should know what they're going into, and they're going into that commitment of the church. And again, as I said, it's part of the discipleship. We are not perfect. The church is made of imperfect people, but we should be accountable to each other to see church members producing fruit and continually growing in their faith. And so it may seem harsh, but it's for everyone's good. It's for the discipleship. It's to make us closer to God and more Christ-like.
That's helpful, yeah. So in that sense, it's kind of it's an act of love, really, isn't it? To discipline someone. It's loving to them as an individual. It's also loving to the church. If we're Christians, we want to be as Christ-like as we can. And I suppose sometimes, if necessary, church discipline is the step which enables us to make progress on that journey. That's really helpful. What then would you say is the purpose of church discipline? Like, why does it exist? Why is it in our Bibles, and why is it a practice that we should do today?
Yeah, the purpose is to make church members accountable for their actions. It's to warn and to care for those who are going down a dangerous path, or maybe starting to go down a path that is quite dangerous, and so we need to be careful and mindful of that. It's to help members see sin that they may be blind to. I know even for myself, sometimes we can be blind to sin that maybe we need a friend, we need the church to see and point out, and so then we can correct it. It's there also to protect the church from people who confess they're Christians, but are leading people astray like wolves in sheep's clothing. It's to actually look at church membership and see actually who's actually pulling and dragging the people around them down. and actually giving a false gospel, really. It's also there to protect new Christians from falling in the same area. If the church starts letting sin in and starting to see it and accepting it, what does that say to the new Christians? If they're allowed to do that, why can't I do that? And so it's a very dangerous path to then lead them down something and just that false security, really. And it shows the church doesn't stand with behavior that's not Christ-like. It's actually showing there's a standard. There's something that Christ expects from us, and we need to try as much as we can to basically just bring honor to God in all circumstances.
That's really helpful, yeah. And that word you said, I think, is really important, accountability, because that's probably something that particularly our generation, Josh, probably doesn't really like so much. We don't really like accountability. We kind of like to feel like we're free and that we can do what we want and we're answerable to no one.
Yeah.
But that really makes us lose out on the richness of community and the church, that we're actually accountable. And I suppose that's maybe the idea where church membership comes into play. That's why maybe membership's a good idea. We could probably do a separate episode on membership, but by coming into membership of a church, you're kind of directly saying, okay, I'm accountable to these guys. I'm accountable to this eldership. And I'm almost giving them a license to rein me in or discipline me if necessary. I think it's also important to remember, like the goal of church discipline is always to bring the person back, isn't it? It's not to just cast them off. But I think that example in 2 Corinthians is really helpful. It's chapter 5 maybe, or maybe it's earlier than that. But talking about the goal of church discipline to be to bring the person back, to restore them, to come among us again. And so as you think about that topic of bringing someone back, would it not be embarrassing? Someone might think it would be really embarrassing if you've been disciplined by the church and then you're kind of coming back to church. Is that not kind of a bit embarrassing?
Yeah, it can seem that way in so many areas, but I think we need to remember the church's goal is never to embarrass or point fingers at their members. No one likes their sin exposed. We all know that. We don't like being told we're wrong. But we need to guide and build each other up. And as you said, Matt, it needs to be out of love and care that we have discipline. We're not to portray ourselves better than other members, but we are to encourage others to strive towards godliness. We need to be willing to sacrifice our embarrassment to know that church disciplines is out of love for you and the church. And through discipline comes restoration. I think as it may be embarrassing, and maybe you might have them mixed feelings, that of course the devil's going to use that to pull you away from your church. But really we need to remember, actually we need to set that aside and go, actually this is for my own good, this is for my own restoration, and think of the joy that it's going to bring once you come back from that. And it's a great testimony as well. So
brilliant. It's helpful. Just as we wrap things up regarding this discussion, could you point us to any kind of biblical examples, maybe in the New Testament, where it talks about church discipline? Maybe these are verses that people want to check out or study a little bit more in depth. Anywhere you would like to point us to?
Yeah, there's a few verses that kind of talk about this, even in Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 to 17. It talks about where Jesus talks about how church leaders address members who sin against you. And he kind of talks about how we're to approach them privately. We're not to bring them up to the front and publicly shame them there and then. We're to come across them and actually sit down alongside with them and say, listen, we need to talk about this. But then Jesus goes on further to say that actually if they don't listen to you, then bring a witness, bring someone with you to and sit down and chat again. And if they still don't listen to you, then bring it to the church body. And so I think that's really helpful illustration that Jesus brings us. And even then, Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 1 to 3, it reads, it is actually reported that there is no sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that is not tolerant even among pagans. For a man has his father's wife, and you are ignorant. Ought you not rather to mourn? Let us who have done this have removed among you. For though absent in body, I am present in spirit, and as if present, I have already pronounced judgment on the one who did such a thing. So here Paul tells us how we need to remove people who are destroying the church. And it may be a painful process, but we are to be careful who we accept into membership. I think that's really helpful. And then just lastly, in 2 Thessalonians, in chapter 3, verses 13 to 14, it says, "As for you, brothers, do not grow weary in good doing, for anyone does not obey what we say in this letter, take note of that person and have nothing to do with them, that they may be ashamed. Do not regard them as an enemy, but warn them as a brother." And I think it's really helpful that we are to be accountable, and even though it may sound harsh, we need to do it out of love, that we actually protect the people and our church members. And we're accountable even for ourselves, but also the people in our church. And sometimes we can maybe forget that. We can forget how the person beside us doing in their walk, in their faith, and we can draw alongside them and help them and walk with them in that. And I think their verses are really helpful.
Super. That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Josh. Hope you've all found this discussion helpful on the topic of church discipline. Again, probably not one that you've thought about much before, but hopefully this kind of is the start of maybe a journey of maybe exploring a little bit more about those passages that Josh shared with us, and maybe even doing a little bit more reading about it as well. So thank you. Hope you all have a good day, and make sure you tune in again in 2 weeks' time as we check out our next episode of Let's Talk. Thank you, guys.